It was October again, and you could smell the pumpkin spice in the air. The sound of children preparing for trick-or-treating was almost audible, and of course, the inevitable wave of judgmental neighbors started to creep up. But one neighbor in particular, Karen, had decided to make it her mission to make sure I knew how wrong my Halloween decorations were. Now, I'm no amateur when it comes to holiday decor. Halloween is my time to shine. I go all out. Skeletons, fake spiderwebs, cobwebs in places that would make anyone else wonder what was going on in my life. And of course, the pièce de résistance, my life-sized Halloween skeletons. These aren't your average skeletons. No, I went all out. The skeletons were characters. There was one dressed like a cowboy, another like a ballerina, one just chilling in a hoodie like your typical emo teenager, and my personal favorite, an old man skeleton sitting in a rocking chair. The whole vibe screamed, I'm here for fun, but I also know how to throw a proper Halloween party. Now, enter Karen. Karen was the kind of person who would look at a beautifully arranged pumpkin patch and call it tacky. If it didn't fit her idea of perfectly manicured suburban decor, it wasn't worth seeing. If there was a yard decoration that didn't scream minimalism to her, you best believe she would have something to say about it. So when she saw my front yard for the first time this season, she couldn't contain herself. Karen, as she always did, made it her business to inform me how unsophisticated my decorations were. You know, she said, hands on her hips, lips pursed like she'd just eaten something sour. I don't know what possessed you to put all these skeletons in your yard. It just looks so tacky. Her voice dripped with that condescending tone she used when she was trying to make it sound like she was being polite, but really she was just being a nightmare. I looked at her and then at the skeletons. Were they a little over the top? Sure, but was it Halloween? Absolutely. Tacky. Karen, it's Halloween, not a Victorian funeral. Skeletons are what we do. She gave me a tight smile, clearly not impressed. Well, I just think it looks childish. You're giving the whole street a bad name. I stared at her, incredulous. The sheer audacity. This was Karen. Karen, who once complained about someone's rose bushes being too pink. Not the right shade, mind you. She would complain if you put too many decorations, then complain if you didn't have enough. Karen was the living embodiment of the too much is never enough mentality, but only for herself, of course. You know, I said, trying to keep my cool. You could have gone with some cobwebs and a plastic pumpkin like the rest of the folks around here. Might have fit your aesthetic better. Her face flushed with indignation. Well, I don't want my yard looking like a circus. Oh, don't worry. It's only Halloween, Karen. Next month we can go back to the world of beige. She didn't take kindly to my sarcasm, of course, and so she stormed off to her house, her heels clacking against the sidewalk with the intensity of someone who had just encountered a real catastrophe in her life. I shrugged, let her go. My skeletons weren't going anywhere, and frankly, I wasn't about to let her suck the joy out of my Halloween spirit. The next morning, I was out there again, tweaking my skeletons, adding a new little skeleton dog to the collection, because you can never have enough skeletons, right? That's when I noticed something strange. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves, and suddenly I could have sworn I heard something. Not just the usual creaking of plastic skeleton joints. No, this was something different. A low, almost maniacal chuckle. It sent a chill down my spine, but I figured I was imagining things. After all, Karen wasn't exactly known for making me feel all warm and fuzzy inside. Maybe I was just hearing things because of the weird tension between us. But as the days wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something strange was happening. My skeletons, my beloved skeletons, started to behave differently. It started small. A crooked grin here, a hand raised in an unexpected gesture there, but then it escalated. One night, while I was checking out my Halloween setup from the window, I could have sworn I saw one of the skeletons grin at me. Not just a regular grin, but one that stretched across its skull like something out of a horror movie. I blinked. It wasn't possible, right? I thought I was losing my mind. But then, that afternoon, Karen walked by. She took one look at the skeletons, then stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes widened and her lips parted as she stared at the cowboy skeleton. It wasn't the same as the other skeletons. It stood there, slouched a little as if it had been waiting for her. She must have thought she was imagining things too, maybe a little extra pumpkin spice in her latte or something. but the skeleton didn't respond, which, under the circumstances, seemed reasonable. After all, it was our skeleton, but still, the movement felt too intentional. The way its plastic joints creaked and clicked as it shifted, as if it were alive in some way. And let's be honest, I was starting to get a little freaked out. I'd seen this sort of thing before in horror movies, where a decoration moves on its own, and it's usually followed by a lot of screaming and running for your life. But this wasn't supposed to be happening in my front yard. I had a reputer, but when she took a step closer, one of the skeletons, the ballerina to be specific, grinned. The way it moved, like an actual smile, not just some wind-blown prop. I swear I saw it happen in real time. Karen stood there, frozen in place, staring at the grinning skeleton as if it had just broken the laws of physics. She blinked a few times, then looked at me, clearly expecting me to explain. Did you just see that?" she asked, her voice shaky. I couldn't help myself. I shrugged. "See what?" And just like that, the skeleton went back to being perfectly still. Karen's face was priceless. I couldn't help but let out a laugh. As the days passed, the strange occurrences around my skeletons continued to escalate. Karen, however, seemed convinced she was simply losing her mind. She'd wander by my house every day, and I could see the look on her face, the suspicion, the trepidation. She had gone from criticizing my tacky decorations to now avoiding eye contact with them, as if she was scared one of them might reach out and shake her hand. It was hilarious. I mean, the woman had been practically giving me unsolicited lectures on how to properly decorate for Halloween, and now she was second-guessing whether or not she was hallucinating. Talk about poetic justice. But it wasn't just Karen. Even the rest of the neighbors seemed to start giving me a wide berth. I'd overhear murmurs in the street, whispers of disbelief as people stopped to stare at my front yard. It was like my skeletons had become a local attraction. Not exactly the Halloween vibe I'd anticipated, but hey, if Karen was going to give me grief, at least I was getting some recognition out of it. But things didn't stay funny for long. One evening, as Halloween drew closer, the wind picked up and the temperature dropped. I was inside, finishing up some spooky baking, because naturally I was going to share Halloween cookies with everyone except Karen, when I heard a noise. Not just the usual creak and groan of my skeletons rocking in the wind, but something else, something unnerving. It sounded like scraping, like bones dragging against the concrete. I looked up from the kitchen counter, my cookies momentarily forgotten. At first, I thought it was just another neighborhood cat wandering through my yard. But when I peeked out the window, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. My cowboy skeleton, the one Karen seemed to hate the most, had moved. Not just a little. Oh no. The thing was standing upright, its hands gripping the edge of the porch railing like it was preparing for a showdown. I wasn't sure if I should be laughing or running for the hills. I opened the window and called out, "Hey, what are you doing, cowboy? You know you're supposed to be dead." I grabbed my phone and texted a few of my friends to come over. I needed backup. At least someone who wasn't going to stand there and mock me. I told them what was going on, but none of them believed me, of course. "Stop messing around with us. It's just a little wind." One of them texted back, "Yeah, sure." The wind had made my skeletons come to life. Exactly. Then, as if on cue, the grinning ballerina skeleton did its thing again. But this time, it was different. The smile was almost wicked, as if it had been waiting for someone. As if it had been waiting for Karen. That's when I started to piece it together. I wasn't dealing with ordinary Halloween decorations. I was dealing with something that had a mind of its own. Something cursed. I didn't have time to second-guess myself. I sprinted outside, my heart pounding in my chest. "Okay, no, this is not normal," I muttered, rushing to the front porch. Just as I reached the yard, I heard Karen's voice. She was standing at the end of the driveway, looking at my skeletons from a safe distance. "This is insane. I told you these decorations were ridiculous," she yelled at me, as if I hadn't been standing there the whole time with a front row seat to whatever sinister thing was unfolding. I shook my head. "You have no idea," I said, my voice quieter than usual. "You should have stayed inside." Karen, of course, didn't listen. She was Karen. She walked toward my skeletons with the air of someone who had a point to prove. And as she took a step closer to the cowboy skeleton, it grinned. I saw it. I wasn't imagining it. The skeleton's grin widened as if acknowledging Karen's presence. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees, and the air around us felt heavier, as if it were holding its breath. Karen looked back at me, her face pale. "You did this," she said, her voice shaky, eyes wide with shock. "You did something to these skeletons." I could barely stop myself from smirking. "Me? I'm just trying to enjoy Halloween, Karen, but maybe your judgmental comments came with a cost." She gulped and looked at the skeleton, which was still standing there, grinning at her. But it wasn't just standing there anymore. The cowboy skeleton started to move, creaking its joints in a way that sounded like someone was getting ready to draw a weapon. Karen shrieked and backed away. Okay, you win. I was wrong about the skeletons. I'm sorry." The sight of her backing off so quickly, her face a mix of horror and disbelief, almost made me laugh. Almost. I wasn't sure if I should apologize for the terror she was experiencing or just let her stew in it for a while. It was, after all, her own fault for thinking that a little tackiness couldn't come with a side of supernatural revenge. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Karen's face was pale, like someone who'd just encountered a ghost in their living room, which, in a way, she had. The cowboy skeleton's grin grew even wider, and the wind picked up again, sending shivers down my spine. I could see Karen visibly shaking now, her eyes flickering between the grinning skeleton and me, as if trying to make sense of the bizarre situation unfolding right in front of her. Okay, I admit it. I was wrong about your decorations," Karen stammered, her voice rising in panic. She was now backing away from the skeletons like they were about to leap off their platforms and chase her down the street. The sheer irony of it all. Karen, who had spent the last few weeks criticizing my Halloween spirit, was now on the verge of a full-blown panic attack, all because she'd decided to mess with the wrong decorations. But then something happened that I wasn't quite expecting. The skeletons, after standing motionless for the last few days, shifted. Not just the cowboy either. The ballerina's smile twisted into something much darker, and even the old man's skeleton in the rocking chair seemed to come alive, creaking its bony limbs as if it had been patiently waiting for this moment. I could practically hear the cogs turning in Karen's head as she realized she had crossed some invisible line, some threshold that she could never go back from. It wasn't just that my decorations were tacky anymore. It was that they were cursed. And Karen, in all her self-righteous glory, had somehow managed to provoke the wrong spirits. She turned to me, eyes wide, desperation evident in her voice. "What did you do?" I shrugged, genuinely enjoying her terror. "Oh, you know, just a little vintage Halloween vibe with a twist. You should have stuck with your basic pumpkins and bats, Karen. You don't mess with skeletons like these." Karen's face contorted in horror as the wind howled, but that wasn't what had her on the edge of her sanity. It was the way the skeletons were moving, not with any purpose, not like they were coming after her, but just moving as if the air around them was alive. I had to admit, it was a little creepy, but the whole situation was so deliciously ironic that I couldn't help but relish in the moment. Karen had spent the past week looking at my decorations with disdain, and now she was the one who couldn't escape. "I'm so sorry," Karen wailed. "I swear, I didn't mean it. I won't say anything bad again. I'll take down the decorations in my yard if you just make them stop." Oh, she was desperate, wasn't she? The woman who had spent the better part of a month mocking me was now begging for mercy. I almost felt sorry for her, almost, but not enough to let her off the hook that easily. "You know," I said, dragging out the words for a maximum effect, "it's a little late for apologies, don't you think? You can't just insult my skeletons and expect to walk away scot-free." Karen's eyes were wide, darting from skeleton to skeleton, as if expecting one to rise up and drag her off into some creepy underworld. Meanwhile, I was trying my best not to laugh. It was like watching a drama unfold. Only I was the star, and Karen was the one who had walked into the middle of a very poorly thought out plot. "Please," Karen begged. "What do I have to do?" I thought for a moment, savoring the situation. "Well, I can't just undo what's been done. The skeletons have felt your disdain. I don't think you can just walk away from this." "But Fine," I interrupted. "There's one thing you can do. It's simple, really." Her eyes were wide with hope. though there was still a flicker of doubt in them. "Anything, just tell me." I leaned in closer, lowering my voice for dramatic effect. "I need you to admit, publicly, that my decorations were not tacky. In fact, I want you to tell the whole neighborhood how impressive and artistic they are, that they are bold, creative, and the best Halloween decorations this street has ever seen." Karen blinked. I could see the wheels turning in her head as she tried to figure out if this was some sort of joke. "Wait, what?" "You heard me," I grinned, enjoying the sight of her discomfort. "Say it, Karen. Say it with feeling." She glared at me, clearly torn between her pride and the very real fear that the skeletons might come alive and drag her into their undead clutches. Finally, with a long, drawn-out sigh that I could practically feel, she muttered, "Fine, your decorations are impressive and the best Halloween decorations I've ever seen." It was the most reluctant, half-hearted confession I'd ever heard, but she said it, and that was all that mattered. The skeletons immediately stopped moving, the air lightened, and the wind died down. For a moment, everything was still. I took a deep breath, relishing the silence. There, all better now. Karen's shoulders sagged in relief, but she didn't leave immediately. She stood there for a moment, staring at the skeletons with wide, distrustful eyes. Then, without saying another word, she turned and walked away, her footsteps quick and frantic as she rushed back to her house. I watched her go, a satisfied smirk spreading across my face. My skeletons may have been a little eccentric, but I wasn't about to let Karen ruin my Halloween fun, and the best part, she was never going to make fun of my decorations again. That night, as I sat on my porch enjoying a cup of tea, I noticed something strange. The cowboy skeleton, the one Karen had been most afraid of, was smiling. Not the usual grin, but something far more sinister. I shivered. Maybe Halloween had its own way of getting even, after all. The days following Karen's begrudging confession were eerily quiet. Halloween was drawing near, and the street was buzzing with activity as neighbors set up their decorations. Some people went all out with fake spiderwebs and plastic pumpkins. Others kept it low-key with a few candles and ghost cutouts. But all eyes were on my yard. My skeletons, my prized skeletons, were the talk of the neighborhood. I'd received a few compliments, and some of the kids even stopped to take photos with them before moving on to the next house. Everything seemed normal. Too normal, actually, except for one thing. Karen was nowhere to be seen. The first few days after her little confession, she'd kept her distance, but now she'd completely disappeared. No visits to the mailbox, no passive-aggressive comments shouted from her front yard. It was like she'd gone into hiding. I thought it was a little suspicious, but didn't give it much thought at first. After all, I had bigger things to focus on, like making sure my skeletons were positioned just right for maximum spook factor. But by the night before Halloween, when the full moon hung low in the sky, I started to feel uneasy. Something wasn't right. I'd been too caught up in the drama with Karen to notice that the air around my house had changed. The wind seemed to blow in a different direction, the leaves swirling in an unnatural pattern. It was like something or someone was watching me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the skeletons were alive again, as if they were waiting for something. I walked outside, my breath visible in the cool air. The skeletons stood motionless, but I noticed that the cowboy skeleton was no longer grinning. Instead, its expression was serious, almost threatening. I couldn't explain it, but something about the whole scene felt off. But just as I was about to head back inside, I heard a noise. It was faint at first, a soft scratching sound coming from Karen's front yard. I paused, squinting through the dark. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a raccoon or a stray cat. But then the sound grew louder. It was as if someone was dragging something heavy across the ground. My curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped closer to the fence that separated my yard from Karen's. And then I saw it. Karen's porch was empty. Her usual Halloween decorations were gone, replaced by nothing. No jack-o'-lanterns, no bats, no ghosts. Just a single large object in the middle of her lawn. A mound of something that shouldn't have been there. I squinted, trying to make out the shape, and then it hit me. It wasn't a mound at all. It was Karen. Or more accurately, it was her skeleton. The same cowboy skeleton that had once grinned at her now stood on her porch, eerily still. But what was even weirder was the way it was positioned, right in front of her door, like it had been waiting for her to come home and that's when I saw it. Karen was standing at her front door, her face pale as she stared out at the skeleton. Her body trembled, and she didn't even seem to notice me standing there, watching her. I stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Was this some sort of Halloween prank gone wrong, or had the curse from my skeletons somehow followed her home? Before I could call out, Karen finally spoke, her voice shaking. No, no, please, not again. The skeleton's jaw clicked open and closed as if it was trying to speak. The grin was back on its face, wide and malevolent. It was as though the skeleton was mocking her, as if it were enjoying her fear. And then, as if on cue, a soft whisper echoed through the night air. It came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Karen froze, her eyes wide with terror. The whisper grew louder, louder, until it seemed to drown out everything else. I told you not to mess with the skeletons, Karen. The voice rasped, low and menacing. It sounded like it was coming from the skeletons themselves, the cowboy one in particular. The grin stretched even wider. Karen screamed, and not a normal scream. It was a sound of someone who was about to lose their mind. I couldn't help it. A small part of me felt sorry for her, but another, much larger part, was delighted at the karmic justice unfolding right in front of me. Maybe Halloween was just a little more magical than I gave it credit for. Maybe Karen's obsession with judging my decorations was the catalyst for all of this. As Karen scrambled backward toward her door, the skeleton seemed to lurch forward, but I didn't stick around to see if it grabbed her. I didn't need to. I knew the skeletons would handle things. I took one last look at the porch, and then, with a satisfied sigh, I turned to head inside. The skeletons had won.